Now, we'll have our next, that's a panel discussion. They will share the academic and industrial perspectives of opportunities and the challenges of reading digital transformation. This will be moderated by Leslie Owens. She is a senior lecturer in MIT Sloan School of Management and also the executive director of MIT Center for Information and Research, System Research. She will also introduce the panelists. Let's welcome Leslie and also the panelists to be on stage.
I think we're in different spots of the room, so we'll just give us a moment, please. So I'm going to encourage you to feed us questions and have this turn into the panel that you'd like it to be. Anything from this morning all the way up to Brian's talk, and Brian's joining us here on the panel, that you're curious about, this is your chance. And I'll be looking at the pigeonhole and feeding the questions when I can. So as Graham mentioned, I'm the executive director of the MIT Center for Information Systems Research, commonly known as CISR. There's a lot of nice overlap between members of CISR and members of ILP. We feature industry-leading global firms that join our community and share and learn and read our research. Our website is cisr.mit.edu. I hope all of you are registered and that you receive our monthly research briefing that comes out the third Thursday of every month. Encourage you to register on our website to get access to case studies and the latest frameworks on digital transformation. If you like this agenda, you'll like the stuff we do because it's exactly these kind of topics. I welcome you.
You want us up? Okay.
Come on up, please. Okay, great. Well, we had a chance to meet you earlier, Brian. Why don't we briefly have a chance to
Which one?
Introduce yourself, Nipa and Paola. Go ahead, Nipa.
Hello, everyone. I am Nipa Basu. I'm from GHD. I'm the Global Director of Digital Intelligence.
Thank you. Paola?
And I am Paola Lucetti. I work for Procter & Gamble here in Boston.
Great. And so what's exciting about this assembly is that we have an academic, we have a B2B expert, we have a B2C expert, and I'm kind of a knowledge worker in the mix. And so I thought I'd start with you, Brian, because your talk was very interesting. I'm looking for a pathway in to thinking about the person who isn't familiar with the typical factory these days, typical manufacturing. How much of what you're describing and the work that you're doing I would see if I walked into a typical manufacturing environment today?
Yeah, you would, the idea of process control, whether it be feedback or it's pervasive. Yeah, so this is the bread and butter of ultimately when you teach manufacturing, what are you really teaching? You're teaching about how to deal with variability. And the way that you address and try to control variability is with control systems, strategies that allow you to either at the line in real time sort of actively adjust your inputs to sort of get the thing that you want, or within the framework of SPC, statistical process control. So I collect the data that it says, well, once I've used my real-time feedback to deal with the deterministic sources of variation that can be done with this real-time thing, all that SPC is really, when you're in control from a statistical process perspective, when there's nothing left other than true randomness, right? You look for the bell curve, you look for this Gaussian distribution. If it looks something that's non-Gaussian, there are likely some deterministic things that are hidden in there, but it's pervasive, whether it be chemical manufacturing, semiconductor, automobile.
Terrific, thank you. Nipa, why don't we do a little bit more context setting about your firm and about your role?
Sure. I know GHD is not exactly a household name. So GHD is an engineering consulting company. It's a global professional services company that focuses on engineering consulting. It's actually an almost 100-year-old company, headquartered in Australia and little more well-known in Australia. GHD Digital is relatively new. It's part of that digital transformation of companies. Little more than 3 years ago, this part was established. I lead a part of it. We call it digital intelligence, maybe just because we want to confuse everybody. It really means data and analytics. So in the morning when Barbara was asking if there are chief data officers in our company, I wasn't sure if I should get up. I feel like a chief data and analytics officer, but my title is not that. It's Global Director, Digital Intelligence.
Let me ask you about that. What would it feel like if you were the chief data officer? What do you mean there?
It will not be that unusual for me. Before this job, I took the GHD job about 2 years ago. I was in a data company, and I was the chief analytics officer and very closely partnered with the chief data officer. These roles are very close, and these names are kind of evolving.
Yes, I agree. Paola, could you also offer a little bit more context about your role?
Sure. So I am the Chief Information Officer for one of Procter & Gamble sector, grooming. And grooming manufactures iconic brands like Gillette, Venus, The Art of Shaving, Joy, Brown, and more. And for those who are from the area, you might have seen as you drive by South Boston the sign of the Gillette World Shaving Headquarters. This is where I work. I'm not originally from here, and if you want, I can tell you a bit of my story of how did I end up in beautiful Boston. I'm originally from Italy, and this is where I studied. I studied electronic engineering, and I specialize in biomedicine, so everything which is medical machines and ultrasound, CT scan, as we're doing today, MRI, and all this area. And I'm mentioning this because I really love how technology can help in healthcare, and specifically in diagnostic. This is a great passion of mine. It remains a great passion of mine. And how did I end up from Italy, from Florence, where I studied, to Boston is because I joined Procter & Gamble 20 years ago in information technology. And I had the pleasure to work in many places. In Europe, I had a wonderful assignment in Asia, in Manila, and a few assignments here. All of those in information technology, working in different area of Procter & Gamble, different business, different function, from supply chain to marketing, and in my last assignment I arrived here. So from Florence to Boston, which are two of my favorite cities in the world. So,
Love it. I see that when I take the train. I haven't taken the train in a long time, but I recognize that World Shaving Headquarters iconography. So I love that you said passion, and I've had the chance to talk to all of you in advance of today's panel. And why are you passionate? This sounds so hard to me, to be running a digital transformation initiative. And I know especially both of you find a lot of joy in what you're doing. Can you help pass along the enthusiasm you feel in your roles?
What do I like? I think what I really like of my job is that what we are doing is really to serve consumers. So everything that we do is really to put the consumer at the center. So, and that is really what attracted me to Procter & Gamble, the focus on consumer and finding solutions for problems of consumer. That is what I deeply enjoy.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Nipa?
Yeah, in this room, probably we almost don't need to explain why we are passionate about digital, right? Probably the audience is, everyone is. In my case in particular, what I'm enjoying right now immensely is applying data analytics, which I have done all my life, in a new set of industries. And really 2 years ago, I didn't know anything about these industries. I was primarily serving financial services. From there, now we are working with environment, water, transportation, and the use cases are incredibly varied, and the projects are all new. So it's the ability to learn new things and at the same time leading my team through all these learnings. That's what makes me enjoy my job.
Brian, in your talk, you talked about going faster, and I'm just curious what's driving your work? What is motivating you?
I guess at the core, I like to say, so manufacturing is sort of the mechanism by which innovations are rooted into the economy, right? So if you really want to be at this, if we're the innovation ecosystem around Kendall Square and MIT, it really is at the heart of how you scale the innovations that are coming out. If you can't manufacture it and you can't do it at scale. So I think that's, and being a mechanical engineer, computer scientist, I've been doing smart manufacturing for a long time before it was called such. So it's just it was sort of my center of mass for a long time, but why? It really is it's the heart of, and it's a hard problem, right? It's this fusion of manufacturing challenges, of people challenges, and of data challenges that are enabled by the technologies that we benefited from in consumer devices that are now becoming more pervasive in the manufacturing enterprise. So it's some exciting, interesting challenges that allow us to root the innovations that are coming out of MIT or other places into our ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think your lens as an engineer and MIT person is towards this tangibility of it. And it's kind of interesting, Nipa, your role is both that you're working with digital, but you're also working with such heavy, industry, infrastructure, energy kind of clients. Do they understand, or their lens about digital versus tangible transformation? How do they see that?
Yeah, it's both ways actually, especially for me, as I said, that I'm applying it to new industries. Mm-hmm. So I have a huge learning curve, and at the same time, folks who have the domain knowledge and who are dealing with the non-digital aspects of it, they also have a huge learning curve, and that's why communication is hard and communication is important, and making sure we understand each other. When it comes to the data science component of digital, probably there is the problem of a higher level of expectation than reality. There is so much hype about it, as if it will do magic, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a long way to go on both sides, and a lot of collaboration needed.
Do you feel like this? I was going to.
I would just add to the hype piece in terms of, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Gartner the dynamic cycle of hype, disillusionment, and sort of steady state progression of technology. But it's my sense, I'd love to hear your opinions on this, that the reason we're talking about this right now is that we've actually gotten over a lot of the hype in some areas that they're mature enough now that we actually can be functional and do things, as opposed to them being snake oil.
Yeah. I think it varies from industry to industry a little bit. Not everybody is at the same level of maturity, but I see a movement in that direction also.
Paola, can you tell us more about the role of digital within consumer product goods as an industry?
Sure. Let me say that in my current role as a Chief Information Officer for Procter & Gamble for the grooming sector, everything I do, everything that my team does is truly in service of the business strategy. So what we say is that we work to support and amplify the business strategy, ultimately in support of our consumer. It's all about serving our consumer. And that's really what drives us. You heard us say, fall in love with the problem, not with the solution. So the challenge actually for someone like me in technology, who really loves technology, who loves everything which is innovation, who loves tries, is to really make sure that what we are adopting is in response of consumer needs, and we truly focus on consumer problems. And I can give you an example just to illustrate my daily job is one of the problems that we saw from consumers in our category in grooming is that, and I can relate to that as a consumer, they really wanted to choose products that were good for them and find those products in a way that is convenient and that is easy, and get the product if really not run out of products, so get the product automatically if needed, and really get something that will fulfill their desired style. So we started with that, and we redesigned what we call our consumer digital experience, starting from the US. If some of you want to go and check it out, you can go to Gillette.com. This is the first e-com shop that we've been redesigning. And what we try to do is really to design a digital experience that was easy, that was engaging. We also launch what we call advisors. We have Shave Advisor and Style Advisor, so that the consumer can get really suggestion based on the style that they wanted. We know we have a lot of fantastic products that goes from shaving to facial hair styling to prep to trimming. So that, with some question and sometimes using picture, if the consumers felt comfortable to do so, we could give suggestion of this is your routine, this is the suggested style. And we went even during the pandemic, we went even a bit farther. One of our brand launched an online barber's consultation. You know, when it was the time nobody could go out and see a barber, this was another way for us to provide this kind of services. And this is all a consumer experience, which has a lot of complexity behind. So we have fun stuff like machine learning and an ecosystem of platform. But really the starting point was the problem that we wanted to solve. And this is one of my daily delight, I would say.
I myself have watched YouTube videos on how to give a haircut. That's something I think I'm probably not the only one in the room during COVID who couldn't see a stylist, so I probably should have used those services you had. But can you say more about how COVID, changed your data and analytics strategy, and how you were serving customers during this unusual pandemic?
Well, I can talk a lot about what happened with the COVID and the pandemic. I think on the consumer, I can mention a couple of things that I see changing, that I can relate as a consumer as well. A lot of the shopping move online, right? So I am already a super heavy online user, and during the pandemic, for some period, that's all what you could do, so really shopping online. And as more and more people move online, and some of you might have seen some of the chart that shows like the move, the salience of e-com in the last month or the initial month of the pandemic versus years ago, it goes like that, right? The expectation really changed, so consumers become more and more demanding, rightfully so, in terms of experiences, in terms of ease of use, and this is what you're seeing, this is there to stay. Someone says that the digital cart is sticky, and I like this saying. What this means is that once something moves into online, it's very hard to pull it out. So you will continue probably the shopping experience even when you are able to go back to store. And that's the case for me. I can relate perfectly. And so we are seeing this higher expectation on, for example, finding product. It's no more okay to just go and search for something and have a list of 5 pages. People want suggestion. Communication is no more sufficient to have text or email. It's more about multimedia. It's more about bidirectional. So that is, I think, is here to stay, and it's something that, of course, we are acutely aware, being the consumer area. So that's one example. Another example that I find very fascinating is in time of COVID, what we saw is that a lot of isolation. I felt isolated. I think many of us felt isolated. So what we saw emerging is a broader usage of immersive experience. So the usage of virtual reality to really simulate an immersion. And one example I want to make that I found really good is what Procter & Gamble did last year at CES, as the Consumer Electronics Show, 2020. It was all virtual, right? Nobody could go to this event. And what we did, we create what we call P&G Life Lab. And if you go and Google, you will find some of the clips. And this is a metaverse in which you can go in with your avatar, you can customize your avatar, and we create all our metaverse with our brands, with a large area on sustainability, which is a very felt area for us, and you can go in with your colleagues, with your customer, with the consumer, and there were very nice voice proximity functionalities so that you can talk to people. I still remember I met for the first time one of my new hire in the metaverse, so yes, it was like, hi, I'm your new boss. And it was really, really interesting. And I think this type of experience that really solved a problem, the problem of isolation, a problem of finding a new way to connect in an immersive way, I think they are there to stay. And there is a lot of technology behind this, but again, to answer to a consumer need.
Thank you. Nipa, what was your lived experience like the past few years? How did you accelerate the work you're doing?
Right. I think if anything, the pandemic actually accelerated digitalization, whichever way you call it. The trend was already there. We were all going there. Mm-hmm. And then the pandemic made it necessary. In many of for our customers, they have to go on site to do certain things. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't do it anymore. So then they relied on drone pictures or videos, and then we created digitized data from there. So these kind of things. And in terms of the workforce, it was so different. So initially, I think everybody had a lot of problem adjusting. But I also saw advantages, Have you ever noticed that if you are not in the same town, and many of us work for global companies, you couldn't be together even if you wanted to. If majority of the people are in the room and you are on the phone, it's actually very difficult. It's easier if all of us are on Teams or all of us are on Zoom. So those kind of things, so quickly you get used to it, In the morning, I was hating the idea of wearing the mask all day, and then when I came up, I forgot to take it off. So it's one of those things, So now that we will start going back to the physical workplace, at least I hope we will go back to it, I think we will have to find some new normals, some new way of working.
I'm going to jump to the questions so that I can encourage you guys that I am seeing them, because it speaks to the first question, the most upvoted question. I'm going to ask that to you, Nipa. So are you finding that it's more difficult to be pushing new technology, or is there acceptance or resistance from the workforce? And I ask this as a segue from what you were just saying, because my hunch is that people are feeling more receptive to tech as a result of returning to the office and being aware now of the digital backbone that's running their firms. But you could challenge me on that.
Yeah, no, I won't challenge you. I think so too, And if we are talking about working from home versus being in the office, it really depends on your situation, I have young parents in my team. It's very difficult for them. Whatever technology you provide them working from home while taking care of your kids is hard. But if you are in a different life stage, it's almost like, okay, I don't have to commute. I can put in more hours and I can be more productive. Mm-hmm. So at least in the workforce that I deal with, I haven't seen resistance to technology when it comes to working remotely.
Mm-hmm. Brian, do you feel like this might be a golden moment for tech leaders?
A golden moment for tech leaders, I think there are certain technologies that we're more accepting of now, whether it be Zoom and online communication teams, but there's manufacturing, most professions are contact activities. I was reflecting, it was really hard. It's hard. Education, research, manufacturing, they're all contact sports. But there's a lot of culture that you need to bring along in the implementation of technology. So I think for some of the communications things, yes, but for things that are a little bit more, still technology, but they're a little less pervasive for things that are like machine learning applied to manufacturing processes, right? That's not something that anybody's now more familiar with. So a lot of the reason when we do professional education here at MIT, it's just to bring together people from different places in the organization to sort of have a convening ground to demystify, the technologies, to sort of come up with the common language to how to think about and explain what they are. So I think it's sort of a golden moment, but it's sort of been continuous golden moments. But I think it's always, you need that pervasive sort of feedback loop of if you're going to introduce new things, you need to get the culture and sort of the education and training brought along with it. And I don't think we fixed that. The pandemic has not solved that problem. Yeah, in some ways.
I'm surprised to hear you say culture. I think that that's probably something everyone in the room is thinking about, because so often we've talked about that tech is commoditized, there's so much open source, it's not really going to be a source of differentiation anymore. It's about like how you're using it and other things. And I do wonder if, and just in my exposure to different companies, they've really gotten more themselves during COVID, and leaders CIOs who have been, drumming away at operational excellence, they kind of were like, ta-da, I did it, aren't you so glad that we had all these things in the cloud already? And then other people have had like a change in power, right? Where you talk about chief data officers, I'm sure HR leaders, other people were suddenly in total hot seat for the past 2 years. So I'm just curious about that idea of participating in an ecosystem, like you mentioned, when people are data sharing. It seems to me as if when people come up with someone from a different firm, they have not had the same experience. And so I'm curious about how you can speak to maybe your Alcoa experience. Are there times when you see companies partnering now and they might be in very different maturity stages than they were before? Do you see what I'm saying?
I think so, but I think there's the bringing sort of partners or sort of customer-supplier relationships together. But I think there's still just, for large organizations, there are culture pockets that show up in sort of the office that's in the US versus Europe. And so I think there's still a lot of work that needs to happen, just sort of, I don't want to homogenize cultures, but sort of just looking at the best practices that are happening at one particular location within the company. There's still a lot of opportunity to do that cultural exchange than worrying how you sort of do it with your customer or your supplier.
And we've talked about that a little in our conversation before today, Paola, when you and I were talking about skills and about broad versus specific skills and kind of the assumptions we can make about business people, tech people, people who are consumer facing. Can you kind of describe the P&G skills landscape for us?
Yeah, sure. Let me start with myself. I personally, as a technical person, as a CIO, digital skills and learning digital skills and relearning digital skills is at the heart of what I do. It's my daily job. It's not only expected, it's highly encouraged, because technology changed so much that we need to make sure that the skills remains relevant and that you can apply the right skills. It's my third time here at MIT in the past few weeks, and I've been meeting Leslie few weeks ago to talk about some important skills area for P&G. I was here at the MIT Hackathon to meet the up-and-coming, the students, and see them using technology to solve wicked issues. And I'm here today, and I invest a lot of time as a technologist on technical skills. What I think has changed, though, is the technical skills, and I mean here programming, information security, analytics. We talk a lot about analytics, up to advanced analytics and science. They become much more pervasive. And before they were, I remember when I started in P&G, a bit of an IT thingy. Now they really are pervasive, not only with the new hires, but also within the company. It has become much more common to have those type of skills. and they are highly encouraged. Now, not everybody is the same depth. There will always be people with a great depth, like people in technology, but it's much more common. And if you combine this with the fact that our platform, or some of our platform, had become more intuitive, more modular, some of our technical platform, this is creating a good convergence. Like, a lot more people can have access to those technology, and they can do more work, like more development, more analytics. So I think this is changing. Analytics is a great example, but I see this all over the areas. I was talking with a colleague of mine whose daughter is in medical school, and they use R and Python as anybody else who will be in computer science. And some say that programming coding will be the new lingua franca. Who knows, maybe.
Do they train them in R, or they assume they already know R?
They train, yeah. They train.
Yeah, this does make me wonder. I feel like if you guys had come to this conference a few years ago, we'd be talking about, the dearth of talent, how everyone's out there seeking data scientists and stuff. And I think it does seem like something's changing, where now a lot of the firms that I talk to are focused on digital literacy and data literacy, and just trying to up-level everybody in their firm, because they're no longer imagining there's this pocket of amazing data scientists they're going to hire, but they're doing something different. And then, like you were saying, this low-code platforms and other mechanisms, AI is so much better than it used to be. It's more accessible to jump into a tech project. Yeah. Can you speak to your skills and how it's working at your firm?
Yeah. I would say it's a continuum. Actually, there are so many softwares now available, like point-and-click softwares, right? So with very little training, you could do some basic data science. Mm-hmm. And how do you define data science? A Power BI or a Tableau. Using Tableau, you produce a dashboard. That's kind of data science, at a certain level. So then there are the really skilled data scientists who have put in a lot of effort in acquiring that skills. So I think the ideal would be if these kind of data scientists' times are saved from the simpler work with the use of software, with the use of the general training that people are getting, like basic things. But still, there are really incredibly hard problems to solve. And I think here in MIT, you guys are solving some of those problems. That's still a highly specialized skill, I would say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how are you seeing the firms that you're working with solving it? What do they do?
So again, it depends on the industry, When I was in financial services, I think it was more the problems were narrow, and everybody had bought into the value of things like predictive modeling and all that, and that was very common. When I came to these other industries, they're very varied. There are still parts of the different organizations in environment or water or transport that are still not digitized. We still have an initiative of digital data collection. That's the most basic, right? Till data is digitized, you can't do anything. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it's these industries that are trying to solve the most complex problems using data scientists, sometimes of their own and sometimes outsourcing it to other companies like my company.
Mm-hmm. So how do those blended teams work? I'm kind of getting into the question here. I'll click on it so that it shows that I did it. Well, I don't want to overpromise. I think there's that one incredible demand for analytics talent. And what I'm curious about is these hybrid teams or firms that are working with consulting and contractor partners and stuff. And given how secure and private and confidential and heavily regulated all this data is, how does that come together to produce a product or an offering?
Right, so that's why what Brian was presenting was music to my ears.
About encryption?
I work for a company that sells data analytics for a living, right? That's our product. So other companies are outsourcing their work to us. And in some cases, those other companies have their own team of data scientists. They're busy with something. The need for data analytics is so large right now that I think nobody can say it that they will do it all on their own. And though it's our product, we also partner with other companies to provide the solution, because there's no way my team could be an expert in each and everything. So it's definitely a field where the demand is far greater than supply. So that's where the role of academics comes in, right? Creating the future data scientists. So it's a process.
I also think, going back to like R, teaching R, Python, if I were to ask you, what's the most common data science platform that's actually used? It's Excel.
I knew you were going to say that.
I mean, I think that is the reality, but I think that's slowly changing. I think where we get this tipping point of where it becomes easier is, when Python and R and the tools become desktop applications that are just easy to use. We're slowly getting there, and I think that's the direction that we're heading. That's why, the maturity of the tools and the examples that are, you also don't want to just rely on open source materials always. You want to have somebody that you can pick up the phone and complain to. So maybe, Microsoft needs to do the machine learning version of Excel.
Probably in there. So when you talked about interdisciplinary collaboration on your slide, which I said I want to ask him about that, isn't it kind of good if everybody's using Excel? Isn't it like faster time to value if people keep it simple?
There's certainly a good benefit having that level set of, hey, I know I'm going to be able to open your file and read it and understand what you did. You can't do everything there. And so, I mean, in providing that common language, that common, that's the reason that the Office suite took off, right? Because it's provide that common tool for business. So there is a benefit there.
I want to help one of the people who put in the question about working at a conservative firm. My company is extremely conservative and refuses to use cloud services, even if we encrypt the data. How do I convince my company to make the digital leap? That must happen. So this is something we've covered a lot at CISR, where we talk about how there's actually two transformations underway. One is the ongoing effort to become digitized, and the other is to become digital. And being digitized, this is the work of Jeannie Ross and others in the book Designed for Digital, is to keep marching forward on the stuff you've been doing since the 80s and 90s, just best practices of a well-run company, using tech to be more standardized, disciplined, process-centered, cut costs, efficiency, and things. And that's probably where cloud fits in, is just in that ongoing thing that is probably going to keep going for 10 more years at least. And then being digital is where you get to realize the benefits of all of that hard work and elbow grease of becoming more operationally efficient, that then you can seize opportunities when a new partner comes up or somebody presents an opportunity to co-create with your customer and things like that. It's like you're ready because you have the underpinnings of your operational backbone that can handle a modular experiment and not break everything, all your systems of record, So that's what at CISR, how we describe the persuasion that I know you face of, just these expensive, time-consuming, massive system of record projects.
So building on sort of the fear of letting the conservative, The actual sponsor for our encrypted machine learning work was actually an insurance company. And so the actual work is simultaneously exploring the new insurance business relationships and technology that needs to be able to put in place that would sort of provide the technology security that things aren't going to be breached. But so new business models, insurance models that would say, well, yeah, and if the technology breaks, here's an added layer of underwriting that if something is breached, then yeah, we're going to provide the backstop. And so the insurance company wants to know how to price that product and de-risk it. But it might be one of those mechanisms that some additional business assurances and contractual relationships need to go hand in hand with the technology that's enabling you to sort of outsource the data or what have you.
That's part of why this whole typical digital team is so cross-functional, that there are people from legal and cyber and all these different product management for sure. A typical team is not at all business or tech or something else. Yeah. Do you have thoughts on that, Nipa, about how your teams are structured and how you're moving through the basics of tech into digital opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to what both of you talked about, but it's a journey, you know. So my team is, it started with a traditional data management team. You know, I won't call it a data team because it didn't have the other aspects of data operations, you know. So we managed other people's data. We are the custodian of their data. So governance, privacy, all those things were really important. From there, we are now adding the other components like data science, like data analytics. We also have a long tradition of doing spatial work, location intelligence related work. That was always there. So now we are sort of trying to change it into a data products culture, you know, something that will start with data strategy, then comes data collection, then management, then drawing insight and creating reports from it, then predictive analytics, use of AI, ML, and then ultimately prescriptive analytics, you know, because sometimes if you are not that passionate about data, many of these things could feel like that the technology and the analytics is going ahead of the business needs. Mm-hmm. Can we really match it to a business problem and show ROI from there? So that requires a slightly different skill set. You know, the best Python programmer may not be the right person to talk to the conservative business lead who doesn't want to believe in it, you know. So people with storytelling skills, they're the digital translators. We have really incredibly knowledgeable people who understand the environmental problem, the water-related problem. They don't get machine learning. So we have a lot of translators who are the storytellers. So that's how we are trying to do the change management and trying to come up with the business story from advanced technology.
Did you want to add something, Paola?
I was thinking about you guys were talking about data, and from my lens of consumer data are very critical, and so is privacy and security. And as a consumer, I relate to that because on the one hand, I want all my experience to be customized, personal. I want everything very easy, repurchase and register, etc. At the same time, I want to make sure that my data are treated with the utmost confidentiality for the usage that I sign up for and that are secure. I want to feel that they are secure. And in this area, since again for us it's all about consumer and service consumer need, what we've been doing in the past year is to collect what we call consumer-based permission data. And those are data that consumer will give to our brands or decide to share with our brand or share with Procter & Gamble as a whole for a specific usage, and trusting us that we will, of course, do the best to protect the data and to leverage those for what we were talking before, personalization, personalized offer, like, you get the suggestion for what you need, advisor services, and more. And so that's really core to what we do. And it's, of course, always something that it's in our mind, making sure that we manage the data in the right way, really offering to consumer what they're asking and protecting the data.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to ask, if you think about the design of a new consumer product, how are you framing that now? Do you say from the beginning, okay, there's the physical and there's the digital, and the experience is everything's being simultaneously designed and thought through, or how are you taking that co-design of the digital experience of whatever the physical product is?
Well, there is no, I wouldn't say there is no one digital transformation. In my humble opinion, what happened is that you identify the biggest problem first, and you tackle this, you transform, you get the right skills, you get the right measures, and you address this first, and then the goalpost will move, and you add the other problem, etc. So to your point, I think what we do is more really breaking down the biggest problem or unmet need into components and tackling those one by one to then build the overall experience. I don't know if it answers your question.
It does. I'm just sort of, because you can imagine, there's a relatively new design initiative at MIT, and broadly, if we think about design, either with the hat of a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, physical product, consumer-oriented or other, are we at the point where it's always going to be, we need to be teaching design through the lens simultaneously of, here's the physical, here's the digital, and there the two shall part. So I'm not. It'd be interesting to see what's really happening in different sectors.
Yeah, and if we could circle back to what you were saying earlier, were you describing, you said a data product strategy, so you're taking the principles of product management and trying to run data through that same set of linear steps? Because that does speak to what you were saying, so it's like, when do you fold in the digital experience, when do you imagine, I guess most of your work is for born digital kind of B2B customers.
Yes, so most of our work is for external customers, right? So I'll give an example. We do a lot of environmental work. What this is in any kind of manufacturing, and most of these are old problems. At some point, people were not as conscious about the impact on environment, and they have ended up contaminating different parts of land or water. So there are all these contaminated sites. And there are very long-term programs of fixing that or remedying that. So we work with each customer separately. They give us their data, it's sensitive data, so we never share, we never, it's not allowed to commingle. But there's actually tremendous value in that data if we could combine and if we could draw insights from that combined data. If we could, we haven't done it yet, our business is just managing the data. If we could create a solution, and that would be a data-based solution. That would be a data product.
I see.
So it's a combination of all the steps, starting from data collection to something prescriptive. This is now what the company is supposed to do. That is a data-based product.
Okay, terrific. I'd be remiss if I didn't notice and mention that you're both women in STEM. And so I'm curious, as we're wrapping up, how you would imagine suggesting supporting other women who want to take this kind of path.
Yes. As a woman in STEM, as an engineer, as someone who has done technical study, I must say that the road has been lonely sometimes, which is why I'm really passionate about making sure that we encourage both men and women, boys and girls, to take a career in STEM if this is what they want. And I feel lucky because I'm very supported by the company. Procter & Gamble has a tremendous respect for STEM career and profession. So we love to have our IT experts, our scientists, engineers, and we love to recruit them and to develop them. And we are part of different efforts like Girls in STEMs and more. Personally, I think that whatever happens that drive away girls from STEM happen early, somewhere very early in the career. So when you are in college, it's probably too late. You have already chosen. And I can relate to that. I remember when I was in high school several years ago, and I was supposed to choose where to go to college. I felt that the expectation for me was to do literature or history or philosophy, which is nothing against that. It's just I really like more physics and math and science. And I felt this was more on me than on my brother. Now, I don't do well with expectation, apparently, because I just jump into engineering. And I remember that at the time when I started, was more than 20 years ago, it was very few women. So one of the things that we want to do, and I want to share here if anyone is interested, we are launching this year here in Boston a program with the P&G which we call Girls in STEM. And we want to go and talk to middle school girls. Because I think that's really where the decision is starting, and we just want to share how good a career can be in STEM. It can be cool, and give them the opportunity to talk with people like myself or other colleagues of mine, so that they can see that people like them, someone like me, can do this type of career, which is for me foundational. The real decision point to me is when you see someone like you that can succeed. And this is not only for middle school. I've been looking for someone like me to succeed all my life, and I think I've been lucky to see many women in technology successful, and this has encouraged me. And I just want to conclude that I have hope. I think it will happen. I have a 16-year-old son, and he sees both mom and dad. We are both in STEM. We are both engineers. We are both in technologies. And I see him. He sees this, so nobody need to tell him that it's possible for men and women to have a career, because he sees that. You can see women in STEM. Now we will see what he will do. But I see no bias. So I encourage all of us to really keep this in mind. You need to catch them earlier, to share the possibility and show that it's possible. Actually, I like this panel. I think it's a really good panel.
Nipa, would you like to add anything? Final words?
Yeah, my personal journey has not been that lonely. You know, I studied economics. It was not that unusual for women to study economics. And GHD has a very good diversity and inclusion program, and it's not just about gender for all different kind of minorities, but it's also a company of engineers, and majority are civil engineers. So women are a minority in the company, but we're making all sorts of different efforts to remedy that. And you know, you are right. Women will have to be interested in these fields, and this has to come much earlier than they get in the workforce.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking my lovely panel.